Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dietrich and welcome to the top 10 episodes of Law & Order from Season 3. Season 3 was a big one in the Law & Order universe as a mid-year cast change saw the introduction of Detective Lennie Briscoe, played by Jerry Orbach. Detective Briscoe replaced Sergeant Phil Cerreta, played by Paul Sorvino, because Mr. Sorvino thought the cold air of New York City was messing with his vocal cords, which affected his opera singing. And he didn't really want to be tied down to an episodic television show. Orbach had actually auditioned for the role before filming for Season 2 started, but he lost out to Sorvino. Once he got the nod to replace Sorvino, he said he would be on the show for as long as they would have him, and he was true to his word, remaining a part of the Law & Order extended universe until his death at the end of 2004, despite a decade-long battle with cancer that was kept from public knowledge until weeks before his death. Orbach was a real one for sure. If this is the first one of these videos that you've watched, or if it isn't, thank you very much for watching. What I'm trying to do with these top 10 lists is to chronicle both one of the most popular police procedurals of all time, but also to use these seasons as a time capsule for life in the United States of America, charting the gradual changes of life in the nation where I live. I plan on doing all of the seasons of the mainline Law & Order, and eventually to also cover SVU, Criminal Intent, and all the other Law & Order spin-offs in chronological order. If this sounds interesting to you, please subscribe to this channel and drop me a like to encourage me to carry on with this years-long journey. Season 3 of Law & Order originally aired on NBC from September 23, 1992 to May 19th of 1993. The principal cast was made up of Chris Noth as Detective Mike Logan, Dan Florek as Captain Donald Cragen, Richard Brooks as ADA Paul Robinette, Michael Moriarty as Executive Assistant District Attorney Ben Stone, and Stephen Hill as District Attorney Adam Schiff. For the first 8 episodes, Paul Sorvino filled the senior detective role with Sergeant Phil Cerreta, and from episode 9 forward, he was replaced by Jerry Orbach as Detective Lennie Briscoe. Since the network suits were still edgy about the fact the show had an all-male cast, the majority of episodes in Season 3 had a credit of also starring Carolyn McCormick as Dr. Elizabeth Olivet in the credits. We will see much more fallout from this when we get to Season 4, because next year we will see the spontaneous and unexplained replacement of Florek as Cragen and Brooks as Robinette with female main cast members. Season 3 of Law & Order was released on DVD on May 24, 2005, and it's currently available to stream on Hulu. It will also run in syndication on broadcast television and basic cable until Skynet launches the nukes and puts an end to all of us. Guest stars for Season 3 of Law & Order include Claire Danes, Sam Rockwell, Julianna Margulies, Agent Gill from Hackers.
I know where you can stick it. I know where you can stick it.
MacGyver's boss from MacGyver, Marsellus Wallace's assistant from Pulp Fiction, Jessica Pearson from Suits, Lynette Scavo from Desperate Housewives, Michael Dawson from Lost, Detective Jeff Rabin from The Usual Suspects, Holly Flax from The Office, Sister Jane from Orange is the New Black, the assassin from Scarface who wanted to blow up the car with the woman and kids in it, Detective Adrienne Lesniak from NYPD Blue, the guy who drove the van into the tank of toxic waste in RoboCop, and Eric Bogosian, who plays defense attorney Gary Lowenthal in 2 episodes of Season 3, and would later go on to play Captain Danny Ross on Law & Order Criminal Intent. However, you may know him best from this sweet meme.
Access encoded. Gigabyte of RAM should do the trick. We're in. All right, what do we got?
Hide the planet! Hide the planet!
Shut up and get in the car.
As a general vibe check, people are getting much more comfortable with computers in Season 3. A pimp uses one to keep track of his prostitute profits, they use one to generate a composite sketch of some unknown victims, and we get a whole episode about hacking into a hospital's computer.
Hide the planet! Hide the planet!
The economy is getting a little bit better,
Brides, bridesmaids, flower girls. Thank God people are getting married again.
but is still basically crap.
Said he didn't want the headaches. Translation, avoid partnership liabilities during a recession.
In this economy, we have investment brokers down in shipping.
I'll never have to buy him coffee again, but I will miss the work.
And apparently it was possible to rent cell phones.
I don't think he rented a cellular phone at the airport.
And Mike Logan might have rented this glorious brick because he only appeared with it in 1 episode. I would also like to issue a brief spoiler and content alert. If you haven't seen these reruns on MeTV yet and you don't want the ending spoiled, or if you don't want to hear about the sorts of murders and assaults that happen on a hard-hitting late-night cop show, please go watch one of my videos about cars. I've made hundreds of them. Also, I'm going to do my top 10 list a little bit differently for this season. Since Lennie Briscoe replaced Phil Cerreta at episode 9, I'm going to put these episodes in chronological order instead of ranked by how much I liked them, just to prevent confusion. Please leave a comment with your favorite episodes from season 3, and maybe we can come to some sort of consensus about which ones are the best. With all that being said, let's get on to the top 10 Law & Order episodes from season 3.
Sounds good.
At number 10, we have episode 1, Skin Deep, written by Robert Nathan and Gordon Rayfield and directed by Daniel Sackheim. We open with two cops coming into a diner where a very beautiful light-skinned woman is ordering some sort of light-skinned coffee drink, and New York's finest makes some observations.
You just like her because her features are white.
Oh, yeah, that's why I like you so much.
This woman with the allegedly white features takes the coffee she bought up to some loft looking for a Mr. Decker, who she finds dead on the floor with some scissors sticking out of his back. This Mr. Decker turned out to be a fashion photographer, and Logan is admiring the guy's work when he gets admonished a bit by Cerreta.
I think you don't make a detective's salary for being a photographer's assistant. Now, when you're through looking at that body, would you mind taking a look at this one?
Who seems to have discovered Just for Men between seasons 2 and 3. They zip the body up in the body bag with the scissors still sticking out of it, and we roll the intro. We start the investigation with the diner where the coffee came from, and the guy who works there says that Decker had all kinds of women in and out of there at all times of the day, and he made all of them buy him coffee, and they were all lookers. On to forensics, where we learn there were fingerprints on the scissors that killed him, and he had sex with a lady right before he died. Cerreta and Logan investigate Julian Decker by working his appointments for that day, and they discover that most people don't really like him. One of the women they question is an Angela Brandt, who has a daughter played by a young Claire Danes. Another woman is named Betty Ann Carter, and I could look at her and more specifically listen to her.
You should have seen me at 19, sugar. Miss Southern Alabama Cotton Queen without lifting a finger.
From here until eternity. I'm a sucker for a pretty woman with a southern accent. According to IMDb, she is played by an actress named Fia Porter, and unfortunately, she didn't do much else in the realm of major motion pictures and sitcoms. They don't seem to get any good leads from the ladies.
What are you saying? I treat all women like objects?
More specific, like furniture.
Sick J.D. Vance burn. So they go check out Decker's accountant. Decker was clearly living beyond his means based on what he reported to the IRS, so far beyond his means that it indicates he has a secondary source of income. After they do the old dramatically threaten someone with a long prison sentence Law and Order shuffle, the accountant gives up the fact that Decker did a little prostitution promoting on the side.
A lot of guys will pay big bucks to see a girl from the swimsuit issue without her swimsuit.
The detectives do me a solid and go ask the former Miss Alabama Cotton Queen some more questions, and she says Decker had asked her to take money for some horizontal mambo, and he would sit at his computer adding up all the money the other girls were making, but she still wasn't going to do it. This leads us to computer forensics with this nerd with suitably large glasses, and they take a couple of guesses at the password to Decker's computer with this very 90s message after a failed attempt, and they figure out that the password was his birthday. This is why we have to have jiggity-jack passwords today that have at least 12 characters and one special character and numbers and blah 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 blah. They go through the files of the ladies in Decker's employ, and one of them has the initials AB, or Angela Brandt, who is Claire Danes' mom from earlier. Cerreta and Logan think she might have killed Decker, but they don't have any sort of probable cause for a warrant, so they go to her gym and lift a print off of her gym locker to see if it will match the prints on the scissors they zipped up into the body bag with Decker. Of course, they are a match. They toss Angela Brandt's apartment and find some panties that have the same sort of secretions they found in Decker's pajama pants, so they arrest Angela Brandt and arraign her, and she is represented by one of my personal favorites, Shambhala Green. Ms. Green informs Stone that the word on the street is that his DNA match isn't a strong one, and Angela Brandt informs Stone that nobody is going to miss Decker.
Julian Decker was primeval slime, and killing him was like using penicillin to kill the clap.
It turns out Angela Brandt's DNA is only an 80% match to the sample from Decker's britches, which is pretty bad in DNA world. Robinette tries to verify Angela's alibi, which is her ex-husband, and her alibi kind of falls apart because he says she called him to tell him what to say to the cops. Cut to the trial, and Shambhala Green grills the Cotton Queen.
Actually, I'd say I hated Julian Decker and I hope he rots in hell.
And Angela Brandt's ex-husband tells the story of how Angela told him what to say to the cops about her alibi. Shambhala Green brings up the fact that Mr. Brandt had a custody battle with his ex-wife that might give him reason to lie on the stand now. Stone's case takes another blow, and not the kind Angela Brandt used to give for money, when the judge excludes the DNA evidence since it's not a perfect match. As he often does when his case is going poorly, Stone dispatches Robinette to go try to clean things up. Robinette learns that Angela Brandt's daughter, Claire Danes, has had some sort of a relationship with the deceased Decker because he took pictures of her for a modeling portfolio. Dr. Elizabeth Olivet gets her obligatory appearance when she gets to interview Claire Danes, and the 15-year-old was clearly in love with Decker, and her mom did not approve of this relationship because of course she didn't. Olivet thinks it's possible that Claire Danes killed Decker, which explains why her mom is now willing to take a plea bargain even though the case against her keeps getting weaker. The case against Angela gets a lot weaker once they figure out the DNA match on Claire Danes is a 100% perfect match, and her ex-husband then confirms that Angela actually was with him during the time frame that Decker was killed. Shambhala Green takes up for Claire Danes' defense, and after Danes tells her sob story to Stone about how Decker told her they would always be together and she'd be a big model, and then tried to break things off with her because her mom was worth more to him as a prostitute, she snapped and stabbed him. Stone buys the line, and Claire Danes gets 3 years at Spofford. I like this episode because Claire Danes really does a great job as a young actress. This was her first ever appearance on television, and Stone and Shambhala Green have great chemistry as legal opponents, and of course the more salacious aspects of the case are appealing, and the Alabama Cotton Queen.
What do you think you do when this goes and these are all you have left?
At number 9, we have Episode 4, The Corporate Veil, written by Michael S. Chernuchin and Joe Morganstern, and directed by Dan Scardino. This one opens with an older brother picking up his little sister from school in an Oldsmobile with sweet cushioned seats, and she is all jazzed up about being in the school band. She realizes she has forgotten her music and begs her brother to turn around to go back to the school so she can get it, and at that moment he starts gasping for breath and crashing the car. Luckily, nobody was seriously hurt in the crash, except for her 18-year-old hermano Roberto Martinez. At the hospital, his talk screen is negative for drugs or booze, but instead it was a heart attack that incapacitated and subsequently killed him.
The kid had a heart attack.
Dr. Vale.
Hello?
Dr. Vale.
Roll the intro. We start the investigation with the victim's mother and her lawyer at the 37th Precinct informing the detectives that Roberto died because he had a pacemaker that failed, and he had a heart condition that could have been treated with medication instead of a pacemaker. Cragen tells his boys to go check it out. Cerreta and Logan go talk to the doctor who installed the pacemaker in the young man, and he said he finds the pacemaker to be a better solution so as not to subject patients to a lifetime of medication and subsequent side effects. The detectives confirm with several other experts off screen that this is the case, so they start looking at BioNorm, the company that made the pacemaker, since they offered the Martinez mother a $50,000 settlement. I think 50 grand was a bigger deal in 1992 than it is today. They go check out BioNorm, and their CEO, Mr. Cleary, tells them that their pacemakers are world class and they've never had a problem before, and they only offered Martinez the 50 grand to make her go away because he'll spend more than that on attorneys to fight the case. In classic Law and Order fashion, the CEO made a little verbal slip-up that made the detectives suspicious.
Cleary said he never had any problems with his pacemakers. Not that he never got sued.
Mike and Phil learned that 6 other doctors had filed complaints against BioNorm for their pacemakers failing, but none of these cases ever made it to trial because BioNorm settled them all out of court, complete with big payouts and non-disclosure agreements. They returned to BioNorm with a bunch more questions, and we learn this is a family business, as CEO Cleary is now flanked by his son, Cleary Jr., who is helping to answer questions. They admit to settling a few cases out of court, but they say this one is different. The BioNorm pacemaker that was in the Martinez kid's chest was not originally sold to him. They sold it to a doctor to be implanted in a woman named Ethel Barnett. It turns out there is a market for certified pre-owned pacemakers.
Paper isn't the only thing being recycled these days, Detective.
Mother of God.
They go grind Ethel Barnett's doctor, and she says that she took the pacemaker out of Ethel and installed a newer one that suited her needs better, and she donated the old pacemaker to a local medical school. And of course, the guy at the medical school who runs their, parts department, had been selling some donated supplies to a medical supply salesman named Jeff Suter. Suter admits to buying the used parts, but says he reconditions and sterilizes them and discloses to the purchaser that they were used. This turns out to be legal, if somewhat unsafe, unsettling and very gross. They go through some more esoteric details about expiration dates on batteries, and they arrest Suter for murder too, on the theory that he misrepresented the expiration date on his used pacemaker. But this charge ends up going nowhere because his lawyer brings evidence from the FDA that shows the battery in the pacemaker was still functioning properly. What killed the Martinez boy was a corroded lead, which is the wire that connects the pacemaker to the heart muscle. This corroded lead was there from the beginning when Bionorm built the pacemaker, which is doubly gross when you imagine the same wire being embedded in two different people's hearts. Robinette investigates, but none of the people who settle their cases with Bionorm want to talk and break their non-disclosures and give their money back, but all of the pacemakers that failed were manufactured around the same time frame. Robinette checks with Cleary Jr. over at Bionorm and learns that the leads they were using back then came from a company called Asian Pacific Traders, and he assures Robinette everything was fine with those wires because he helped inspect them himself. Robinette also learns that Mama Cleary was the lead purchasing agent for the company back then. A true family business. Our ADA tracks down another pacemaker manufacturer who bought these corroded leads on the cheap from Asian Pacific Traders, which turned out to be a fly-by-night operation that got their hands on some leads damaged by saltwater cheap, sold them slightly less cheap, and got the hell out of town. This fat bald guy had the good sense to throw the leads out, but it appears Bionorm actually used them. Since he admitted to being the one who inspected the leads on the assembly line, and they don't really have any evidence against anyone else, Stone and Robinette charge Sonny Boy with murder too, based on depraved indifference to human life. The trial commences and things don't seem to be going well for our hero attorneys, but baby boy Cleary makes another minor slip-up on the stand.
My parents started contributing to the alumni fund the day I was born.
That clues Robinette into the fact that Mama Cleary might know more about this than she lets on.
Steven said his parents started contributing to the MIT alumni fund the day he was born. But he also said his father went to City College at night.
It turns out Mama went to MIT too, and she was on the assembly line with baby boy Cleary inspecting the leads, and baby boy decides to flip, but not on his mom, on his father, who is apparently the driving force behind this company, and his ambition for growth would not be restrained or constrained by a few faulty parts. Ben Stones and gets the whole family into his office, and mom and son turn on dad for being a taskmaster and a reckless dickhead, and Stone gets pleas from those two, and it's heavily implied he's going to go for a full conviction on Daddy Cleary.
All right, Mr. Stone, I'm a businessman. I've made deals before. What are you offering?
I'm not a businessman, Mr. Cleary. I'm offering you nothing.
Good. If my heart ever goes south, I don't want some reused saltwater corroded leads hooked up to it. Just leave my corpse on the side of the 91 freeway. Nobody is going to notice anyway. At number 8, we have episode 5, Wedded Bliss, written by Robert Nathan and Edward Pomerantz, and directed by Vern Gillum. This one opens with some crazy old man fishing on the banks of the Hudson River, with some over-enthusiastic powerboaters annoying him. He makes a catch despite all the commotion, but it's a young female corpse chained up and handcuffed. The evidence indicates that this is a 15-ish-year-old girl, Hispanic or Italian, who had been in the water for about 6 to 8 weeks. Cerreta is upset because this girl is the same age as one of his daughters, and Logan mentions a similar case he heard about at a different precinct where a young boy was found in a very similar predicament. The mood is somber as we roll the intro. Since they don't have any clue who their victim is, they go to a forensic anthropologist to get a composite sketch of the girl they found, and of course they dug up the boy Logan had heard about 8 weeks ago from the potter's field he was buried in, and do the same thing for him. Cerreta and Logan are then called to missing persons because they had put out an inquiry for any similar cases, and they had found one. A corpse strangled and dumped in the river, although this wasn't a young Hispanic kid, it was a big fat building inspector named Ira Bender, who was tasked with inspecting garment manufacturers in New York City, aka sweatshops. The detective on the Ira Bender case informs our hero detectives that it's a dead-end case, but he gives them a little rundown on the garment business.
The garment business, you know, it's still 1930. You got 5,000 sweatshops, you got 50,000 immigrants at sewing machines.
The day Bender disappeared, he inspected 6 places, showed up at all 6, and he didn't write a summons at any of them. But of course, now we have some real detectives with main character energy on the case, so we're going to get some damn results on this in about 30 minutes time. They go back to the forensic anthropologist, who is just finishing up the composite sketches on her computer, and she tells them that these kids were most likely Mexican. Ira Bender's last stop on the day he disappeared was a sweatshop in a part of the Bronx that had become a Mexican neighborhood in 1992. Cerreta and Logan go down there with the sketches to try to put some names to some faces, and Logan is clearly stressed out by the case. They meet a young man named Rudy who owns a club frequented by the young kids in the neighborhood, and Rudy is a friendly smartass who offers no helpful information. They finally meet someone, a young street vendor, who identifies their victims. Eduardo and Maria Carranza, cousins from Mexico who came to New York City to earn money to send back home. The street vendor shows our cops the abandoned sweatshop they used to work in, which just so happens to be the same place where Ira Bender's last stop was on the day he met his maker. Logan makes a grim discovery in the back of the building, bed frames with handcuffs and blood evidence. They get the crime scene unit to go over the place, and the evidence suggests that the workers at this former sweatshop were being held as slaves. They find a clothing tag from a Wedded Bliss Fashions and duly go see what the story is over there. The proprietor of Wedded Bliss Fashions is very proud of the fact that all of his dresses are made in America, although not necessarily by Americans. He uses contractors, aka sweatshops, for piecework or rush orders, and this particular tag would have come from a place called Royalty Fashions, run by Ellis and Betty Drake. Cerreta and Logan go visit the Drakes at their new sweatshop in Manhattan, and they appear to be the perfect slave masters. They let the mothers with little kids bring the children into work, give the kids milk, pay their people by the piece where they can potentially make more than minimum wage, and notably, they appear to employ primarily people from Mexico. The cops look into the Drakes' finances to try to get a reason for a warrant, because apparently you could look at someone's bank records without a warrant in New York in 1992 because they do this a lot. Through this investigative path, they figure out that the Drakes paid for the liquor license at the club of Rudy Armendariz, who they met earlier at the Mexican neighborhood in the Bronx. It turns out that Rudy and Ellis and Betty go way back. Rudy even has an arrest on his record for stabbing a building inspector at one of their sweatshops. They find a dirtbag guy working in a gun shop in New Jersey who sold Rudy some handcuffs that matched the type that were on their corpses, and they go back to Ellis and Betty Drake's sweatshop when they get a tip that Rudy is over there. The Mexican workers who were there the other day are gone, replaced by Chinese varietals, and they arrest Ellis and Betty in the sweatshop and Rudy downstairs, but not before Logan roughs him up a little bit. This terrible threesome gets arraigned and indicted on murder and kidnapping charges, and none of them make bail. The obligatory plea negotiations go nowhere, and Rudy's lawyer even argues he bought the cuffs, a dozen pairs, because he's got a restraint kink. The DA team is surprised that the Drakes don't want a plea bargain because they seem to be accessories in this case, but they're not interested in dropping the dime on Rudy, the young Mexican immigrant they claim to have raised as their own. Robinette goes and talks to Ellis Drake's brother Fred about the case because this brother has visited Ellis many times inside. From Fred, Robinette learns that Rudy proved his worth at the sweatshop by getting the Mexican workers cheaper than Chinese, and after that, he was practically running the company. Fred also lets Paul know that Rudy and Betty had a little stepmommy-stepson thing going on way before that became a popular trope in adult entertainment.
She's like a mother to Rudy. Only most mothers are not that loving.
She do some cooking?
Home cooking. She didn't even have the decency to do it behind Ellis's back.
The DAs go out to meet with Rudy's wife and the wife's grandmother, who apparently pressured the young couple into getting married for the church.
You wanted his bed, you marry him.
Rudy's young wife Lena claims Rudy killed the two young Mexican kids who were found floating in the river because they escaped and were going to go to the cops. Stone gets the judge to let wife's testimony in past the whole spousal privilege thing, but Lena changes her testimony and clams up under oath. The trial rolls on and Stone has some okay witnesses, but he lacks the knockout punch he needs against his turbulent triumvirate. Stone and Robinette decide to get all three of them in a room together to discuss a plea, and Rudy pisses Ellis Drake off by bragging about sleeping with his wife.
She begged for it, man. She screamed for it.
This makes Ellis mad enough to agree to a plea deal, and he testifies in court that Rudy had them hire Mexican kids and not pay them for their work, and Rudy killed the factory inspector from the city and the two Mexican kids they found in the river. The DAs feel they need a corroborating witness since Ruby's defense attorney made Ellis Drake look like a scorned lover on cross-examination. They hit up Lena's super serious grandma to see if she can help their reluctant witness to the stand. They learn from her that Rudy had her leave her house in Brooklyn to go be with Nina in New Jersey during the time that the Mexican kids were replaced with the Chinese at Drake's sweatshop. They dig up her yard in Brooklyn and find 7 bodies buried there. Stone makes a deal with Rudy and Betty's attorney that will see them in jail for 25 years, which honestly seems a little light for 10 murders and essentially turning people into slaves, but Stone had his reasons.
Cons don't like people who do kids. Rudy may not live to get parole.
I think he'll manage.
This one is a good reminder that we can kick all the immigrants out of the United States if we really want to, but are Americans actually going to do the jobs that they have been doing here? I'm certainly not advocating for using undocumented people as slaves as the Drakes did, but we need a more nuanced and pragmatic approach to immigration policy in this country. Although admittedly, nuanced and pragmatic ain't really the American way. At number 7, we have Episode 7, Self-Defense, written by Rene Balcer and Hall Powell, and directed by Rene Balcer. This one begins with some tow truck drivers betting on baseball via a CB radio when one goes to tow an illegally parked Ford. He finds a corpse on the floorboards, which was not a factory option, and that brings in our detectives. They gather relatively useless witness statements. We learn that the victim, Roland Booker, has been dead for about 10 hours and that he was shot twice in the back. The crime scene unit finds an additional trail of blood, which leads them to an additional victim named
Cecil Booker, 27.
Somebody's pruning the family tree.
Roll the intro. Back at the ranch, we learn that Cecil Booker had a .45 on him that had been fired a couple of times, so there was a shootout that they have no witnesses to. Both of the victims have long rap sheets. Cecil had a crack pipe in his pocket to go with his pistol, so they figure that drugs may have been involved somehow. The cops ask around to the Booker's personal acquaintances to see what they might have been up to, and they don't learn much except for that these guys were broke, owed people money, and liked to get high. Cerreta and Logan then go to the block where the shooting happened to talk to the local shopkeepers. They meet up with a Korean man who owns a dry cleaning business, and he gives the impression that there's lots of crime in the neighborhood, and is a problem.
No problem. Just a solution.
Then they meet a Greek man named Costas who owns a jewelry store, and this guy claims that he closed up early the night of the shooting because business was slow and he didn't see anything. Logan notices that the place smells like fresh paint, and Cerreta notices there's a lot of merchandise there worth stealing. They ask Costas if he owns a gun, and Costas does. Costas goes to the back of the store and it's a .38 caliber, the same as the murder weapon, so they confiscate it and take it to the lovely Arlene Schreier, but our firearms forensic-stician says Costas' gun is not a match for the murder weapon. Logan speculates Costas may have had another gun since the one he gave to them was hidden in the back, which is not a good place for self-defense in a bad neighborhood. Then Logan calls Arlene Schreier Ellen for some reason.
Alan, what's the number for permits?
Speed dial 3.
And they learn there was a second gun registered to Costas. They go back and grind Costas about the other gun and the fresh paint, and he finally admits that yes, he shot those Booker boys. He goes down to the station with our detectives and he tells the story that the two corpses came into his store to try to rob him. They had a gun and he defended himself. Mike and Phil go back to the jewelry store and try to piece together what happened based on Costas' story. They do find evidence that the Bookers shot at Costas in his own store, but they also find evidence that Costas never buzzed them into his shop, leaving them stuck in the security cage while he shot at them. Since this makes the claim to self-defense a little murky, they arraign Costas for murder and continue the investigation. The story structure gets a little messed up at this point, or maybe it was a bad editing job, but either way we learn that Costas had a store in Fort Lee, New Jersey, where he also had occasion to shoot and kill an armed intruder. The DAs start referring to this incident like it's already common knowledge before we, the audience, formally find out about it and get the details. Everyone involved with the investigation finds it odd that lightning could strike the same Greek expat twice, and that Costas would relocate his shop to an even higher crime area after the first incident. The investigators also learned that Costas had a surveillance camera that was running during the shooting, but he took it down and hid the tape right after the incident. They get the tape from Costas' attorney, and it shows the Booker brothers coming into the cage, pointing a gun at Costas, telling him to let them in, and Costas going for his gun and shooting at the soon-to-be deceased brothers without buzzing them in. The Bookers retreat and run out the front door, and Costas reloads and follows them back outside. Since the camera is stationary inside the store, that's all we get to see. This tape exposes a rift between our two detectives. Logan thinks that since Costas followed the Bookers outside after they were no longer a threat to him, that means it was no longer self-defense. Cerreta is more on Costas' side, saying there was an imminent threat to his life and he was clearly defending himself. While going through the ME's report looking for more clues, Logan notices that the Booker boy who was found laying in the car has an entrance wound near his ass and an exit wound near his shoulder, indicating someone either shot him from underneath or more likely shot him while he was lying down on his stomach on the front seat of the car. Cerreta and Logan go to the police impound and check Booker's car, and they find a slug embedded in the carpet of the car. Shooting someone in the back, or the ass for that matter, does not indicate self-defense.
Oh, son of a bitch! You shot me in the ass!
Cerreta is still on Costas' side, but he's the only one. Stone charges Costas with murder in the second degree, and he puts Logan on the stand to explain the police's side of the story. Costas takes the stand in his own defense, and he explains that he thought Garland Booker was reaching for a weapon on the floorboard of his car, and that's why he fired upon him when he was laying there. Stone, Robinette, and Adam Schiff then have a little late-night sit-down in Schiff's office and lament the fact the case isn't going as well as it could be, when they get a call letting them know that Phil Cerreta has been subpoenaed to testify for the defense. Cerreta's testimony is a mixed bag. Under direct examination, he says that Costas' actions on the videotape were justified, but under cross-examination, Stone gets Cerreta to testify that he would not have shot Garland Booker under the same circumstances. Stone makes an impassioned plea against the sort of vigilante justice that Costas seems to have administered here, and the jury lets Costas off on the guy they found dead in the building with the .45 in his hand, but guilty of second-degree murder on the one he shot in the ass. This episode was based on the case of Bernie Goetz, who shot 3 people who he claimed were trying to rob him on the subway in New York City in 1984. In that case, the public initially rallied its support behind Goetz, and at his criminal trial he was acquitted of murder but found guilty of firearms-related charges, but eventually perception of Goetz soured when it turned out there may have been a racial element to the shooting, and Goetz eventually lost a huge civil judgment to one of the victims, but you can ask OJ how much of that money ends up getting collected. Actually, now that I think of it, you can't really ask OJ anything anymore.
Mr. Costas, you are testing our faith in humanity.
At number 6, we have Episode 8, Prince of Darkness, written by Robert Nathan and William N. Fortis, and directed by Gilbert Shilton. This one opens in a nice-looking restaurant where a nice-looking family is celebrating Mom's birthday. Cut to the kitchen in this little clip of a waiter eating a French fry off of a customer's plate that has lived rent-free in my head since last century. All of a sudden, the sound of automatic gunfire rings out, and the father and mother we saw earlier are hit, although their child is unhurt. Cerreta and Logan show up and interview the witnesses, but nobody is really that helpful. They just saw some guy spray a table in the middle of a crowded restaurant, so they probably don't feel like taking the witness stand against him because he could do the same to them. Roll the intro. Back in the squad room, we learn that Manuel Ortega, the father, is still alive, but he took 5 slugs. His wife is dead as a doornail. Manuel is originally from Colombia, and since an automatic weapon was used and he had some money in his bank account, they suspect a drug smuggling angle. They meet with Manuel's mother, who is now the guardian of his little girl that survived the shooting at the restaurant. Grandma assures our guys that Manuel was not in the drug business, he was a travel agent. Mike and Phil go see Manuel's partner, Ramon Buenaventura, who is also Colombian, and he tells them that Manuel was the ambitious brains of the operation, helping grow the business into being hugely successful. The partner says that both he and Manuel love Colombia and were beside themselves about what the drug trade did to their native country. The detectives go to Manuel's family's apartment and search around to see what they can find, and besides a very fat bank book, they find a list of regular customers for his travel agency, back and forth to Colombia every 2 weeks, and a small Derringer chambered in .38 caliber. Back at the ranch, they learn that Manuel's frequent flyers were all suspected or indicted drug dealers, and Arlene Schreier informs them that ballistics on the little smoothbore Derringer are not possible, but that gun could be consistent with the weapon that was used to kill a suspected Colombian dealer 3 months ago, an hour after his plane landed. And of course, who better would know when you were getting back into town than your travel agent? Cragen then remembers something.
Hold your horses. Something here sounds familiar.
Cragen gets out a communique from the DEA saying that a suspected Colombian hitman was on his way to New York, but they did not know what his target was. The hitman is named Javier Gaitan, and according to Logan, he looks like a young Elvis. Phil theorizes that Manuel's mom might know more than she initially let on, so they go roust her again. After some cajoling, Mama tells them that the dealer that got shot a couple of months ago had taken a liking to Manuel's wife and come on to her a little bit too strong, and that's why Manuel shot him. She also says that Manuel's partner in the travel business was supposed to be at the dinner where Manuel was shot and his wife was killed. Our detectives go search Ramon's office with a warrant, and Logan decides to arrest him on the spot for refusing to open a safe. They interrogate Mr. Buenaventura with his attorney present, and after some cajoling, he admits to booking a flight for Pablo Esteban, which is an alias for Javier Gaitan, the hitman. He did this at the behest of the big jefes because they were angry at Manuel for killing the dealer that was trying to nail his wife. They track down a woman who Gaitan or Esteban Gaitan, or whatever his name is, called a few times from his fancy hotel room, and they arrest her and use her apartment to set Gaitan up to be arrested. They get the whole damn SWAT team to take him down, and Logan busts out his 50-pound cell phone to help pull the operation off. They manage to take him down without incident, but he uses his alias, which also happens to be on his passport. This identity issue turns out to be a big one, because they don't have fingerprints from Colombia to prove who he is, and his lady friend's memory gets very foggy when she has to identify him face to face.
Paulo Esteban. I knew him in Bogota.
The judge gives Ben Stone 4 days to find enough evidence to indict Paulo Gaitan, or whatever his name is, or let him go. They go back over ballistics, and based on the fact that the DEA circular says he fired left-handed, and the fact that the bullets that killed Manuel and his wife, oh yeah, Manuel died while I was blathering on, but you probably saw that coming, were .223 caliber, they figure the murder weapon could have been a Steyr AUG, which is an ugly bullpup rifle that can be configured to eject shells either to the left or the right, making it ambidextrous. They get a list of illicit gun dealers who may traffic in such illicit hardware, and Cerreta goes undercover as a mafia don looking for a big gun because, well, if the shoe fits and all that. The gun dealer, who has committed felonies in New York City before, seems like he's high on something and he's real jittery, but Cerreta is cool as always and looking quite dapper as a mafioso. The gun dealer tries to get an extra $500 out of Cerreta, which Cerreta is prepared to pay, but before Phil can get at his wallet, the crazy gun dealer shoots him in the stomach twice. Cut to the hospital, and Phil Cerreta is alive, but in critical condition with a slug near his spine. Mike is totally against getting a plea bargain from the gun dealer to testify that he sold a Steyr AUG to Gaitan, even though that was the whole point of this fakakta sting operation in the first place. The case is weak any way they slice it, and Adam Schiff is getting pressure from the feds to either make a case or cut a deal with Gaitan, because the feds think he can help them to make federal drug cases. The crew goes and visits Cerreta in the hospital, and he announces he'll be able to walk and talk and
I can. All the important things.
So Cerreta says they can cut a deal with the gun dealer if they need his testimony to make the case against Gaitan. The trial gets underway, and Gaitan's attorney maintains that Gaitan isn't Gaitan.
No objection, Your Honor. He's talking about someone named Gaitan, not my client.
And it seems to be working. Stone basically bullies Gaitan's New York girlfriend into making a sworn statement against Gaitan, but 24 hours later she gets cold feet because she was threatened, but Stone manages to get the judge to read the previous sworn statement into evidence, and the jury convicts Gaitan. Outside the courthouse, immediately after the verdict, Javier Gaitan is shot and killed by a man who claims that Gaitan killed his son. They make this guy a deal to do 4 to 12 years in jail, and the judge presiding over the plea bargain lets him out on bail for 2 days to get his affairs in order before he goes upstate. Of course, it turns out this guy works for the cartel, and he was on a plane headed for Colombia 40 minutes after he made bail. The gun dealer got his throat slit in the yard at Rikers, Buenaventura got strangled at the kitchen at Rikers, and Manuel's mom got pushed out the window to her death. But what about Manuel's young daughter?
She was picked up at school by her uncle. She doesn't have an uncle.
At number 5, we have episode 9, Point of View, written by Waylon Greer and Rene Balcer, and directed by Gilbert Moses. This one opens with 2 patrol cops making the rounds in their SWAT car, with the older, fatter, whiter cop advising his younger, thinner, blacker partner how to glom time off of the city clock. The younger and more diligent partner notices a man and a woman on the street, and she thinks the woman is scared of the man, but the lazy white dude cop says she's putting out scent. They get some donuts and coffee and then get called to a shooting, where the man they saw is dead on the ground. The investigation starts, and we get the debut of none other than Detective Lennie the Legend Briscoe, played by Jerry Orbach. Here is the second ever line Briscoe ever says on Law and Order.
When I was doing, I don't wear a beeper.
In this first scene, Lennie is made out to be a crotchety old guy who nobody likes, including calling out the fat cop for eating donuts instead of working his beat properly.
Stuffing yourself with Oscar's donuts?
Logan gives Lennie a little pushback on that one, but Briscoe had his reasons.
Hey, Briscoe, I don't know how you work, but it's not about donuts.
It is when there's powdered sugar on his blues.
Roll the intro. The investigation starts at a bar called P.J. Smith's, which the shooting occurred in front of. The bartender claims he didn't know who the victim was. Briscoe and Logan then cruise over to Gleason's boxing gym because their victim had some tickets to the place on him when he was killed, and they learn the Vic's name and one of his character flaws.
It's Tommy Duff. You know him. Never bet minorities.
Turns out Tommy Duff ran a liquor distribution business, and PJ Smith's was one of his customers, the bar where the bartender claimed not to know him. Mike and Lennie go back to the bar to figure out what really happened, and after some encouragement, the bartender tells them that word on the street was that Tommy Duff was a bagman for Jimmy Scanlon. For those of you who don't know, a bagman is someone who transports cash money for organized crime organizations, at least on TV and in the movies. Our detectives go rouse Scanlon, who is just some generic Irish mob boss for the purposes of this episode's plot, and he of course claims to not know what a bagman is, or what protection is, or who Tommy Duff is. Cut to the squad room where Logan is giving Lennie grief for messing with Phil Cerreta's desk. They discuss Duff's criminal record, which does indicate he has a past linked to organized crime, and Briscoe gives us a very succinct summary of murder motivations for various ethnic groups.
Your Italians and Hispanics kill for love. Mix kill for money.
Mike then goes to Cragen and asks him when Phil is coming back, and Cragen makes it clear that timeline is unknown. Logan goes and visits Phil Cerreta in the hospital, who thankfully is recovering well from his shooting. Unfortunately, Cerreta tells Logan he won't be his partner anymore. Although he will be able to walk and get around fine, he will have some weakness in his legs from some nerve damage, and he's been offered a desk job at some other fictional New York police precinct with better pay and easier hours, so he's going to take advantage of that opportunity as one would. This is the happy ending for Paul Sorvino's Phil Cerreta on the show, a happy ending that a lot of Law & Order characters do not get. In my mind, I like to think there was a fondness for both Sorvino and his character Cerreta amongst the writers and producers to handle his exit this way, both out of respect for him and to leave the door open just in case he ever wanted to come back. Of course, he never did. Of all the people I saw on TV as a teenager, I think I aspired to be like Phil Cerreta the most. A large, well-liked, affable family man who was a kind, respectful person who was not afraid to get serious when the circumstances warranted it. I have only lived up to certain parts of his character, but I suppose I still have time for others. Back on the case, Briscoe pulled some credit card receipts from the bar, and they track down this loser who has no information whatsoever, and this lady who was apparently pretty hammered at the bar, but she remembers Tommy Duff and says he left with a woman who had incredible makeup. Our party girl was so impressed she even asked Tommy's eventual date about it, and the date bragged it was Jacques Desange makeup, a very exclusive salon that only does makeup for women at their salon. They don't sell their makeup to the public. After going through the salon's book of before and after mugshots, party girl doesn't recognize anyone, so they haul her down to the salon, and she picks out one of the ladies there doing the makeup, a Mary Kostrinsky, and the first thing Kostrinsky does is ask to call her attorney. Business is picking up. Both of the patrol officers who drove by and saw Tommy Duff with a woman on the sidewalk identify Kostrinsky as that woman. They also get a partial print off of one of the shell casings at the crime scene that matches Mary, so they arrest her. She gets a good attorney, Laney Stevens, and together they argue to Stone that she shot Tommy Duff out of self-defense. She says Tommy was drunk and trying to assault her sexually and forcibly, and she shot him to prevent that from happening. Duff was unarmed, but they argue his size was his weapon because he was much larger than her. Schiff doesn't think Stone has any chance of winning this case without further evidence, and right on cue, Robinette provides some. Tommy Duff was shot from at least 4 feet away, indicating whoever shot him probably wasn't in grave danger of being assaulted by him at the moment because they were at least 4 feet away from him. And his blood alcohol level was 0. He had quit drinking because he had an ulcer. They shoehorn Olivette into the episode by having her interview Mary Kostrinsky to see if the latter really thought she was going to be raped when she shot Tommy Duff. 3 weeks prior to this episode airing, Olivette herself had been the victim of sexual assault by a gynecologist on an episode that did not make my list. Will this experience cloud her judgment? Olivette decides the shooting probably was justified, and she tells Stone she would not make a good witness in this case. The trial begins with the 2 patrol cops who saw the couple before the shooting telling their story, and then the bartender from PJ Smith gets up and says Mr. Duff and Miss Kostrinsky were all over each other.
Hands is about the only thing they weren't holding.
But that Miss Kostrinsky sat in the bar for 3 hours talking to nobody, checking her watch every 5 minutes, and rejecting free drinks from every other guy in the bar until Tommy Duff showed up. She allowed Duff to buy her a drink and seemed very happy to make his acquaintance. This makes Stone and Robinette suspicious that perhaps she was waiting for Duff. They don't have much time to ponder this possibility because the DAs get word that Laney Stevens will be calling Elizabeth Olivette to the stand to testify about how she thinks the shooting might be justified based on Kostrinsky's Kostrinsky's fear in this case. Olivet testifies to as much on the stand, and Stone does what he's got to do and brings Olivet's rape up on the stand to show she might not be a neutral observer in this case. Robinette then gets somewhere while investigating if Kostrinsky knew Tommy Duff anywhere else in her life, and he learned she got a gift of $30,000 just after Tommy Duff got shot. The gift came from one of gangster Jimmy Scanlon's right-hand men. They figure somehow Scanlon hired Kostrinsky to kill Duff because Duff was stealing from Scanlon, so Ben Stone meets with Lainey Stevens, who is rocking some legit glasses, to smarten her up to the fact that her client is probably a hitter for the Irish mob, and to get her client to take a plea. They meet up 2 hours later in Stone's office, and Stone gets what he wants. Turns out Kostrinsky's father and Jimmy Scanlon go way back, and when the young lady got herself into an abusive marriage, Scanlon had her husband killed in what looked like a construction accident, so they have been in cahoots for a long time. Scanlon had called in a favor, Kostrinsky whacked Duff, and Stone gets his plea bargain. Scanlon gets arrested, and Stone apologizes to Olivet, who of course forgives him and tells him he was right, and Logan is getting used to Lennie. All's well that ends well, folks. At number 4, we have episode 16, Jurisdiction, written by Waylon Green and Rene Balcer, and directed by Bruce Seth Green. This one opens with one young nursing student complaining to another nursing student about how her dad is paying for her to take a trip to Aruba, but he keeps calling her so she can thank him for it. They go to wake up some other nursing students for a shift or an exam or something, and promptly stumble onto our crime scene for the evening. 2 victims are in the apartment, both nursing students in their early 20s, multiple stab wounds, one dead, one clinging to life. The dead victim is missing the 3rd finger of her left hand, along with whatever was on it.
Jilted fiancé?
And what, she wouldn't return the ring?
Roll the intro. The investigation starts with the 2 ladies who found the victims, and they have no helpful information regarding boyfriends or fiancés or other men of ill repute. The dorm building where the crime happened was supposed to be locked up, but our detectives find evidence that the killer used a little piece of wood, so when one of the doors opened, it would stay open after someone went in or out of the building, and he ate a candy bar while he was waiting in the bushes for someone to grant him clandestine access. Next, they move on to the head of security for the hospital where the dormitory is, and he tells them he does have night patrols around because the nursing students occasionally get a little bit wild. He tells Briscoe and Logan he caught a white guy in his mid-20s in that building a few nights ago checking door handles to see if any were unlocked, but the guy ran away and the security guard couldn't catch him. Then someone calls his landline looking for Logan, indicating that the giant cell phone Logan had a few weeks ago might have been a rental. The call was telling Logan that the victim who survived the attack is awake and able to talk, so they go see her in the hospital. She remembers the attack in pieces. The assailant was a white guy who was very strong. She says she has no idea who the guy could have been, and her roommate knew pretty much all the same people because they worked the same shifts, but Vicky, the dead victim, worked at a methadone clinic in Brooklyn. Lennie remembers some case from last month about a nurse who got stabbed in Brooklyn, so they go over there and check that out. The detective on this case is Detective Torelli, who is played by the same guy who played Detective Rabin in The Usual Suspects.
It all makes sense when you look at it right. You gotta, stand back from it, you know?
Torelli and Briscoe go back to Lennie's drinking days, and Torelli is getting absolutely nowhere on this case. His nurse was in her late 20s and lived in an apartment, not a dorm, but she was stabbed and the place was ransacked, just like the case in Manhattan. She also worked at the same methadone clinic where Vicky, the Manhattan victim, worked, but Detective Dingus here worked a patient list for a week.
I don't think there's anything there.
Mike and Lennie go check out the methadone clinic anyway and get the list of all the patients there, and it is a daunting list. Logan gets the idea to check the list of people who dropped out of the methadone program because they might be looking to steal stuff since they're back on the horse. One of the guys looks like Ron Howard's junkie cousin, but before they can go too far down the list, they get a call from Brooklyn. Torelli has a suspect in custody who has confessed to killing the nurses in both Brooklyn and Manhattan. Briscoe and Logan go meet him, and he is, special, and we get to hear about it in a way that was totally okay in the 90s.
There's nothing in your DD-5s about this kid being retarded.
I'm not some melonhead or Downs dummy.
The allegedly smart detectives from Manhattan bring this guy Davey into a super sus witness ID with Nurse Paloma, who is still hospitalized with her injuries, and she says she thinks it was him before saying it was him without seeming super duper confident about it. Then they walk Davey through the crime scene, and his story kinda sorta makes sense, although he misses a couple of details.
I'm not some melonhead or Downs dummy.
Then he goes nuts when he sees a couple of nurses walk by and he calls them bitches, which doesn't make him seem innocent.
Bitches! Hey. You damn bitches! Hey. All right.
Based on the evidence so far and the fact that Davy has a couple priors for sexual battery in Brooklyn,
kissing doesn't get people arrested.
It can if you're retarded.
they file charges in Manhattan and arraign him. Davy is represented by Shambhala Green, and Ms. Green asserts to the court that her client is not competent to stand trial, so cue Elizabeth Olivet to analyze him. She thinks he reads at a 4th grade level and probably has an IQ of 78, but he knows right from wrong and understands the criminal justice system well enough to assist in his own defense, so he is competent to stand trial. Shambhala Green then makes a motion to get Davy's confession tossed out because Detective Torelli left him by himself for 2 hours in the middle of it and told him he didn't need a lawyer. Since the confession is the basis of their whole case, Ms. Green subsequently gets the rest of it thrown out too.
Put away the whip, Ben. The pony's dead. I'm granting Miss Green's motions.
Schiff, however, still has his whip, and he cracks it to tell Stone to make the case anyway, even though he has no evidence at this point. Paul Robinette gets dispatched to figure it out, and he learns that victim Vicky got fired from her gig at the methadone clinic because she was stealing pills and selling them on the street. Paul learned the name of one of Vicky's customers from her roommate, and the DAs go meet this Marty Lake. He says the guy who turned him on to the drug-dealing nurses called him a week after the Manhattan murder with a bunch of prescription drugs for sale, and also offered to sell him a ring that matched the description of the one that Vicky was wearing when she was killed. And
he said for an extra $5, he'd give me the finger it came with.
The finger chopping was not released to the public, making this a very credible lead. Marty also tells Stone that he went to Detective Torelli with this information when he was first arrested, but he was told to pound sand. Since Lake's charges are pending in Brooklyn and the Brooklyn DA won't help him out on his charges, he's not telling the name of the finger chopping, pill selling degenerate. The Brooklyn judge lets Davy the Div Kid's confession in, and the Brooklyn DA gets a conviction on him for their original murder. To get the reach around on all this, Stone goes to a special narcotics prosecutor to take over jurisdiction on Marty Lake's case so he can get the plea bargain he needs to secure Lake's testimony. And lo and behold, the guilty party turns out to be Ron Howard's crackhead cousin.
Probable cause? You got no probable cause. You're under arrest because you're probably guilty.
The jurisdictional issue still persists, so Stone once again uses his magical plot device of the special narcotics prosecutor to take over the prosecution of the Brooklyn murder, and Stone uses this leverage to get Ron Howard's cousin to take a plea that will put him in jail for 25 years. The episode ends with Detective Torelli getting arrested by Briscoe and Logan in Brooklyn with some internal affairs guys for subordination of perjury and obstruction of justice. I'm not sure when Lennie and Mike started assisting internal affairs in Brooklyn, but hey, maybe they got help from Stone's special prosecutor friend. At number 3, we have episode 17, Conduct Unbecoming, written by Waylon Green, Peter S. Greenberg, Michael S. Chernuchin and Rene Balcer, and directed by Arthur W. Forney. This one starts with a bunch of randy and rowdy sailors partying in a hotel with a conga line of men lining the walls, touching apparently willing women as they go by, until the hotel manager calls the cops to clear them out.
I don't expect to end up looking like the Baghdad Hilton. I want them out.
The cops find a blonde corpse in one of the hotel rooms, so cue Lennie and Mike. The hotel manager tells our detectives that things didn't get out of hand until the prostitutes were introduced to the mix, but it turns out that our victim is not a lady of the night, she is a lady of the sea. A Lieutenant Hagen, an officer in the U.S. Navy. Roll the intro. We open the investigation in the squad room with some guy from the Navy giving Briscoe and Logan a list of everyone at the party, but he's already starting to close ranks and plant the seed that this death was an accident.
Lieutenant Hagen got drunk, she stumbled, hit her head. Tragic accident.
There is evidence of some sort of sexual activity, the victim's panties were off, but what killed her was a skull fracture. But she did not die right away after the blow to the head. She had some internal bleeding in her brain, indicating she survived for a little while after the blow to the head, but she would have been in bad shape, slurring her words, stumbling, and basically appearing drunk. Next, we talk to Captain Bunker, the captain of Lieutenant Hagen's ship, and he says she was on temporary assignment to his ship to be trained in anti-submarine warfare. Old Bunky seems to have good things to say about Lieutenant Hagen, and he seems to be cooperative in the investigation. Captain Bunker directs our detectives to a couple of sailors who left before the cops showed up the night of the murder, and these guys claim they left early to go watch a hockey game at a sports bar because they didn't want to truck with the prostitutes. due to marital fidelity and or fear of catching something. The cops also talk to Lieutenant Hagen's roommate, and Lieutenant Mendoza tells them that Hagen was a straight shooter who liked classical music, but she doesn't know much else about our victim's personal life. Briscoe and Logan then come up on a videotape one of the Navy people had made during the party that shows Lieutenant Hagen coming down the conga line, apparently intoxicated, and it shows one of our two hockey fans, Lieutenant Bates, apparently taking her into a bedroom at the end of the line off camera. Bates then tells detectives that his other buddy, Ensign Walters, took her into the room despite the fact he was afraid of catching something. Walters' story is he thought she was drunk, he put her on the bed and was helping her get undressed when she started to vomit, and then she was still and he realized she was dead. He didn't know what happened, he thinks she might have hit her head, but either way she was dead and he panicked and left. These two interviews both happen on the ship where these sailors sail, and their commanding officers, including Captain Bunker, let our detectives know that they will be prosecuting the case in-house since the Supreme Court ruled that the military has jurisdiction over the crimes of active duty servicemen and women regardless of where the crime occurred. Back at the station house, Briscoe, Logan, and Cragen are discussing the case, and Briscoe, the fight fan, tells the story of a boxer who got knocked out in the ring, stood up, went back to take a shower, and died 30 minutes later. They go back to the medical examiner to learn what I told you earlier about Hagen's head trauma being survivable for a little while, although she'd appeared drunk. The question then becomes whose room Hagen came out of before she stumbled her apparently drunk but actually mortally injured ass down the gauntlet, and the answer to that question turned out to be the room of old Bunky himself, Captain Bunker. Briscoe and Logan track down Mendoza, who was Hagen's roommate, and she said she was in Bunker's hotel room with Bunker and Hagen, and it sounded like they had some history, and at some point Bunker ordered Mendoza to leave. The next day after it became known that Lieutenant Hagen had died, Bunky advised Mendoza to keep quiet about the meeting because it didn't have anything to do with anything or something. While looking into his military record, the DAs learned that Bunky taught at Annapolis at the same time Janet Hagen was a student there a few years before her death. They learned from a Navy admiral that Lieutenant Hagen had filed a complaint against Captain Bunker for harassing her at Annapolis after they had a brief romantic affair. The official disposition was that Bunker didn't get in any trouble, but unofficially he has an asterisk by his name, and his career prospects are severely truncated due to this incident. Now that they have a strong motive and forensic evidence that Hagen sustained her fatal wound while in Bunker's room, they arrest him, of course while he's in the middle of a meeting where a surprising number of Law and Order perps get arrested. The trial commences and we sort of rehash everything we already know, but when Bunky takes the stand in his own defense, Stone gets him to lose his cool when he asks him about a prostitute that Bunky got rough with the same night he allegedly got rough with Janet Hagen.
That bitch deserved it!
The jury convicts Captain Bunker, so he's going to be captain of the USS Don't Drop the Soap for the next 25 years. This episode was very loosely based on the 1991 tailhook scandal, where a bunch of Navy pilots at a conference in Las Vegas formed a gauntlet similar to the conga line at the beginning of this episode. In the real-life incident, the gauntlet was probably much more gropey and sexual assaulty, but nobody got murdered. Luckily, Law and Order fixed that little oversight for us.
I feel about as low as Madonna when she found out she missed Tailhook. I'm gonna say, ouch, for Madonna.
At number 2, we have episode 19, Virus, written by Michael S. Chernuchin and Rene Balcer, and directed by Steve Robman. This one opens with two nurses working the night shift at a diabetic clinic, checking the blood sugar of the patients. This was way before the freestyle Libre. All of a sudden, all hell breaks loose, with multiple patients flatlining and going into shock. Cut to the squad room, where Profaci is teasing Logan with a warm bagel, and Logan has to pick up the ringing phone and field the incoming call if he wants the bagel. The incoming call is reporting 6 deaths the previous evening at the Hogan Hayes Clinic, and we're off to the races.
Could be a nut. Could be the last guy in the city with a conscience.
Could be you should start paying for your own damn bagels.
Roll the intro. Briscoe and Logan go to the clinic to check it out, and it turns out only 2 patients died the previous evening, not 6. However, 4 other patients did get seriously ill the night before, and 1 is in a coma. During an autopsy on one of the decedents, we learn the cause of death had something to do with an extremely low blood sugar count. People with diabetes typically have the opposite problem. Since these were insulin-dependent diabetics, the most likely cause is something to do with the insulin. Either too much much insulin or tainted insulin. Our detectives initially suspect that the night shift nurses may be culpable since they were the ones who were administering the insulin on the night in question. One of them was late for his shift and the other one is a doctor from the Dominican Republic, but since the New York Medical Board doesn't know from med schools in the DR, he is stuck on night shift duty at a private diabetes clinic. However, while Briscoe and Logan are sweating him down, Cragen interrupts the interrogation and tells them 3 more patients at the Hogan Hayes clinic have just gone into hypoglycemic shock, the same thing that happened the other night. Taking all 9 patients' information into account on their magic chalkboard, the detective team cannot figure out why these particular people got sick, except for the fact that they all had 2s in their birth dates. Cragen mentions one of his wacky relatives and suggests this could be a computer-related thing.
My cousin, the number cruncher, he told me that when the IRS does a random audit, they tell their computer to spit people out according to their birthday.
They go back to the Hogan Hayes clinic to talk to their computer nerd with suitably large glasses, and he discovers someone did upload a suspicious 4-kilobyte file into the clinic's network in the middle of the night, right before the hypoglycemic coma issues started. The NYPD's forensics computer guy, yes, I guess they had those in 1993, analyzes the code from the virus and discovers what it does is multiply the blood sugar reading of anyone with a 2 in their birthday by a factor of 4. That means they will get a much larger dose of insulin than they need, enough to either put them in a coma or kill them. The computer cop can't see who wrote the virus code, but he can see based on some signature they put in the code they are a part of a hacker group called the Department of Doom. They go see the leader of the Department of Doom who runs their bulletin board. For you youngsters out there, back in the 1980s and 1990s, if you had a decent computer and some know-how and some extra phone lines, you could set up what was called a BBS, or Bulletin Board Service. Then people who had the phone numbers to the phone lines you had that were hooked up to your computer could call in, connect to your system with their computer if they had a modem and the right software, and leave messages on public forums, send each other primitive forms of emails, and even play text-based games, since the modems and servers were not typically fast enough to support any sort of graphics. As a young lad, I remember dialing into a local BBS to play Legend of the Red Dragon with my friend Jeremy. This was not technically the internet, you were dialing into a closed system, and the internet eventually killed BBSs off. Back to Law & Order, Lennie and Mike go see Michael Dawson from Lost, who runs the bulletin board that the Department of Doom uses to swap information and ideas and code to do illegal 90s hacker stuff.
Welcome to our show! Hack the planet! Hack the planet!
The detectives get Michael to go through the post and messages of his users to see if anyone has asked about medical software, and they do find one user who asked for the access code to a blood analyzer, but he used a fake name and a spoofed phone number from the Toronto area to dial in, so they go through his mail and figure out he has an algebra teacher named McGee, and the cops go find this teacher. This leads them to a kid named John Cook, and a search warrant of his room reveals a computer, and they drag him out of the house like he's Joey Padilla. They find fragments of the virus on his hard drive, but John Cook is playing the dumb smartass role. He claims he has no knowledge of the virus, he doesn't know how it got on his hard drive, and he points the finger at the Department of Doom group for culpability. However, with some further investigation, they figure out the spoofed phone number from Toronto that John Cook appeared to be using when he uploaded the virus to the Hogan Hayes clinic was the same number that called the 27th precinct when Mike Logan picked up the call at the beginning when he was scamming a bagel off of Perfacci. As we shift further into the order part of the proceedings, John Cook's lawyer argues that the search Michael Dawson did for the cops was illegal because he was acting at the behest of the police at the time and they did not have a warrant. The judge agrees with this logic and throws out all the evidence that resulted from that search, which is all the evidence Stone has, so the case is thrown out. Schiff shows he can do more than recommend taking a plea bargain, and he tells his assistants to go figure out who was pissed off at the Hogan Hayes clinic. Robinette doesn't find any current lawsuits pending because apparently in the state of New York at this time, if you wanted to sue one doctor, you had to have another doctor sign off on the fact that your lawsuit had merit. So Robinette looks at complaints that didn't end up as a lawsuit, and he finds a Robert Cook who had a complaint, who turns out to be the father of John Cook. Robert Cook is all pissed off because he's going blind from his diabetes, and he had laser surgery to try to correct that at the Hogan Hayes clinic, but it didn't work. He's been trying to sue everyone and their mom, and everyone has been ducking his calls, but now Robinette wants to talk to him, and that that makes him very happy. Since they found John Cook's father's information without violating anyone's civil rights, they try to refile the charges against the kid based on inevitable discovery, but the judge declines this approach. Since it's the only approach they have left, they file charges against Robert Cook, knowing he isn't actually responsible, but hoping to force the kid to confess via a squeeze play. Initially, this approach seems to backfire because Robert Cook is loving having his day in court, but eventually Ben Stones and gets everyone together in his office for a sit-down, and the kid emotionally confesses to the crime to keep his dear old blind diabetic dad out of prison. At number 1, we have episode 21, Manhood, written by Waylon Green and Robert Nathan, and directed by Ed Sherin. This one starts off in a chaotic police dispatch office where, amongst other things, there is a cop on his own trying to bust a dope deal with armed felons, but no backup. One of the units that is supposed to be headed towards our imperiled officer goes to the wrong address, and then things really go pear-shaped when shots are fired and he is hit, and it sounds like it's the worst possible outcome for our Officer Newhouse. Roll the intro. After the credits roll, Cragen, Logan, and Briscoe are on the scene checking out the dead cop. He was alone out there because his partner was taking the sergeant's exam that night. Officer Newhouse managed to kill one of the 2 drug-dealing perps that caught him in the crossfire, but the other one got away. A young Sam Rockwell plays one of the cops that showed up late to the scene, and he is quite distraught by that evening's events.
On the force 6 months, his first killing, it's a cop.
The detective trio visits the captain of the precinct where the slain cop worked, and Logan busts the captain's chops about his guys being late to the scene, and Logan subsequently gets dressed down by Cragen for his insolence. Next stop is forensics, and the forensics guy identifies the dead drug dealer as a Romeo Ramirez, and there were a set of prints from a Lucho Martinez on a bag of crack, implicating him as the shooter who killed Officer Newhouse. Briscoe and Logan get a mugshot from the files and go sit on Martinez's place waiting for him to show up so they can arrest him. While they wait, Logan complains that O'Hagan, the slain officer's captain, didn't even show up at the crime scene the night of the murder. Briscoe asks if this has something to do with the fact that Logan has had 2 partners get shot in the last 18 months. We don't get an answer to this question because Briscoe spots Martinez coming down the road and they go arrest him. In interrogation, Lucho lawyers up immediately and Logan is letting his Irish temper shine.
You killed a cop, you dumb son of a bitch!
Lucho's lawyer shows up and Briscoe informs him that they have his client's fingerprints on a bag of crack at the scene. The defense attorney then gives an explanation that has been stuck in my head for 30 years.
Prince, huh? You know how I usually handle that? He bought a sandwich, threw the bag away, and then somebody filled it with crack.
I wish I could somehow express to you the amount of time I've spent thinking about this. Could this happen to me? Do people put crack in regular old sandwich baggies? I like a lot of mayo and mustard on my sandwiches. Maybe this will make my sandwich baggage less enticing for the recycling crack dealer. That's why this channel is called Mind of Dietrich. I've been stuck in here by myself for the last 42 years overanalyzing things. Now you get to keep me company. Lucho's attorney seems confident he can get his client off, but Paul Robinette says they are going to arraign him anyway and leave him in jail for 5 days to see if they can come up with more evidence. They get a tape of someone in the neighborhood who called 911 about the shooting but didn't leave a name, indicating they witnessed the shooting. Logan listens to the tape a dozen times to memorize the person's voice so he can recognize them if he runs into them. His efforts pay off as they find their anonymous witness and he picks their suspect out of a lineup. They get their sandwich bag crack dealer to plea, and while he's giving his statement he says he got lucky because there were 2 cops sitting in a cop car right around the corner immediately after the shooting. Now the investigation shifts. Did these other cops leave Officer Newhouse out to dry on purpose? Newhouse had a perfect record until 3 months before he died, and then he started getting bad performance reports. Lennie thinks his precinct may have been dirty and Newhouse was going to blow the whistle. They all go talk to Captain Self-Righteous again, and he says Newhouse just had a couple of minor problems, missed a couple shifts, and he personally had the cops that didn't manage to get Newhouse back up suspended without pay. While Logan was getting yelled at by O'Hara, Briscoe was looking at the papers on his desk, sneaky, and he figured out that Newhouse's partner, McGraw, put in for a transfer the day after his partner was shot. They go talk to McGraw, and he is polite enough but also evasive and not forthcoming with anything useful. They go check out Newhouse's apartment and find very strong evidence that Officer Newhouse was gay.
His backup was slow for a reason.
This new information inspires Briscoe and Logan to go through the transcripts from police dispatch that night, and they find a serious discrepancy with the radio traffic, indicating that the unit parked around the corner that the sandwich bag crack dealer saw was probably the one that said they got the address wrong. They explain all this to Cragen.
Donnie, they left him out there to die.
and the good captain reluctantly gives Briscoe and Logan the green light to dig a little deeper. The good cops from the 27th precinct go to the bar where the bad cops from the 31st precinct drink and start a little static. And then the plot magically moves into Adam Schiff's office, and Stone decides to go talk to Captain Homophobe at the 3-1. This guy has a pretty sus explanation for all of this.
Hey, this isn't nursery school. 140 cops, I'm sure, at home. Some of them say kind of fat.
Just to be clear, I censored that. And in case you couldn't tell, he said the N-word, a word that starts with a K that's a common slur for a Jewish person, and a word that starts with an F that's a common slur for a gay man. That straight went out on the air on primetime broadcast TV on NBC on May 12, 1993. Imagine what would happen on Twitter if that happened today. Stone and Robinette interrogate the cops who failed to back up Officer Newhouse, and their answers don't inspire a whole lot of confidence.
Look, I know you're under pressure. These people have clout. They helped Clinton get elected.
They get Newhouse's partner McGraw in to figure out if he knows anything, and he gives Stone a flyer he found around the precinct about the fact that cops are ministers of God and gays shouldn't be on the police force. Since he was the youngest and the most upset the night that it happened, they get rookie officer Sam Rockwell in for some questioning. He says it was Sergeants Harley and Rhodes who wrote the memo about the cops being a force of God and not liking homos and all that nonsense. Man, I like this guy better when he was the ex-cop in the wheelchair who worked at the gun shop in season 1. The trial commences against the other 3 cops, and Officer Sam Rockwell testifies against them.
Sergeant Harley said Officer Newhouse was a fairy. Said if he was in trouble, he could flap his wings and fly out.
They get Officer McGraw in to ask him some questions to see if he can help their case too, and apparently Robinette had some pretty strong gaydar back in the day.
It's because you're gay too.
McGraw spills the beans and tells our DAs about how he was gay, and despite the fact that he and Newhouse tried to hide their sexuality, the other cops knew they were gay, and he ends up testifying that Sergeant Rhodes was the one who distributed the homophobic flyer. We get some more homophobic slurs on Cross. Then the defense attorneys bring up some psychiatrists who said it's natural for straight men to hate gay men and be scared of them. After Captain Dipshit comes up and testified he didn't tolerate bigotry in his station house, the defense attorney gives a closing statement to the jury, basically appealing to their own homophobia. Stone argues to the jury that individual prejudice should not be a reason to treat anyone differently, give one person more help than another person, etc., 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 because whoever we are, wherever we are from, there's always going to be someone that hates us for it. Stone's logic loses out, and the jury acquits on all charges. Adam helps Stone lick his wounds afterwards, telling him the jury didn't want to convict because they didn't want to confront their own prejudices. This episode shows once again how societal feelings have changed since the early 90s. I hope we can continue to make progress towards equality for all. And if somehow you're a straight man watching this and you don't have any gay male friends, let me tell you something. Nobody in your life will work harder to get you laid by a gorgeous woman than a good gay friend. You can take that to the bank, son. So that's it. That's my top 10 episode list for Season 3 of Law & Order. Manhood was the second to last episode of the season, and the last one was a somewhat mid-outing about a deaf woman who got murdered, and as I said in the intro, that final episode would be the last appearance of Dan Florek as Captain Cragen on mainline Law & Order, and Richard Brooks as Assistant District Attorney Paul Robinette. No fanfare, nothing in the plot, no explanation, they were just gone come next year. To me, Brooks' Robinette was the bigger loss. He was an extremely likable character, and his departure just led to a series of female ADAs, none of whom ever left the same impression on me, except of course Alana de la Garza as Connie Rubirosa. Florek's Cragen got the stronger replacement, and he eventually came back to the Law & Order world in SVU anyway, so that character and actor got the justice they deserved. But we will get into all that next time on Season 4. Please like and subscribe and share with your friends, and have a great day. Bye-bye.